Silas Beckett hadn't spoken to a woman in 7 years. But when he saw Ruth Calloway standing outside that chapel in her wedding dress, abandoned, humiliated with nothing but a canvas bag, and nowhere left to go, he did something no one in Copper Bluff expected. He turned his wagon around. In Montana Territory, 1878, a man didn't claim a bride nobody wanted, unless he understood what it meant to be unwanted himself. What happened next changed both their lives forever. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The church bell had stopped ringing 20 minutes ago. Ruth Calloway still stood on the chapel steps. Her hands were folded in front of her, steady as stone. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was simply standing there in a borrowed dress, with nowhere on God's earth left to go. Silas Beckett saw her from across the street. He was loading flour into his wagon, same as he did 4 times a year. Come to town, buy what he needed, leave, before anyone tried to make conversation. 7 years he'd kept that routine. 7 years since he'd buried everything that mattered back in Pennsylvania, and rode west with $40 and a dead man's horse. He didn't know her name yet. Didn't matter. He recognized what she was. He'd been that same thing once. "That's Ruth Calloway," Henry Osborne said, stepping out of the general store, wiping his hands on his apron like he always did when gossip was about to pour out of him. "Been standing there since Garrett Phelps sent his brother to call off the wedding. Didn't even come himself. Sent his brother Silas. Can you imagine?" Silas tightened a rope on the wagon. Said nothing. "Phelps found himself a banker's daughter from Helena. Eleanor Ridley. Got money got. Family name got. Everything Ruth ain't got." Henry shook his head. I left her standing right there in front of the whole town. Reverend Whitfield had the Bible open and everything. "Not my concern," Silas said. "No, I reckon it ain't." Henry leaned against the doorframe. "But here's the thing, Crowley. I mean Beckett. Mrs. Hargrove says Ruth can't stay at the boarding house no more. Says a jilted woman's bad for business. Drives respectable customers away." Silas pulled his hat lower. "Still not my concern. She's got no people, Silas. Parents died 2 winters back. Scarlet fever took 'em both inside a week. Cousin took the family land, said a single woman got no legal right to property. She's been working for Hargrove, scrubbing floors and washing linens, just to keep a roof." Henry paused. "Stage leaves day after tomorrow. Don't know where she'd even go. Plenty of towns out west. Plenty of graves out west, too. Woman alone with no money, no connections." Henry's voice dropped. "You know what happens." Silas climbed onto the wagon seat. He took up the reins. The horse shifted, ready to move. "Safe travels," Henry called. "Try not to disappear completely out there." Silas clicked his tongue and the wagon rolled forward. He did not look at the woman on the chapel steps. He did not let himself think about the way she stood, that terrible dignified stillness of someone who had already accepted the worst. He made it 6 miles before he stopped. The horse stamped. A hawk screamed somewhere overhead. Silas sat on the wagon seat, staring at the empty trail stretching north toward his homestead, toward 7 years of silence, toward walls he'd built with his own hands that had never heard another voice. He thought about his brother Daniel, dead at 19 from the pneumonia that swept through after they lost the farm. He thought about Catherine, his fiancée, who'd looked at him standing in the ruins of everything his family had built and said, "I can't marry a man with nothing, Silas. I'm sorry, but I just can't." He thought about Ruth Calloway standing on those steps. Silas turned the wagon around. She was still there when he came back. Late afternoon now, the shadows stretching long across the street. She'd sat down on the top step, her canvas bag beside her, hands still folded, eyes still staring at nothing. But she stood when she heard the wagon. No hope in her face. No fear either. Just that steady measuring look of someone who'd learned to expect nothing and was rarely disappointed. Silas climbed down. His boots hit the dirt. He walked toward her, slowly, and he could feel the whole street watching Henry from his store window, Mrs. Hargrove from behind her curtains, old Reverend Whitfield from the chapel doorway. Let them watch. "Your name's Ruth Calloway," he said. "It is. Mine's Silas Beckett. Got a homestead 15 miles north. 160 acres cabin. I built myself 6 head of cattle chickens, 2 horses. Hard land. No neighbors close by. Ruth watched him.
I ain't offering charity, Silas said. I'm offering it to you. You need a roof. I need help working the land. Winter's coming in a few months, and there's more work than one man can handle. You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to survive. Something shifted in her eyes. Not quite surprise, more like careful calculation. You don't know me. Don't need to. I know what it looks like when someone's been left behind. And I know what it costs to stand alone when nobody's coming back for you. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. The street noise seemed to fade. No wagons, no horses, no voices. Just 2 people, standing in a silence that meant everything. What's in it for you? She asked. Really? A partner. Someone who'll work hard and not complain about the isolation. Someone who won't expect things I can't give. Romance, you mean? Romance, he confirmed. Comfort. Easy conversation. I ain't built for those things.
What are you built for? Keeping my word. Working till the job's done. Making sure nobody under my roof goes hungry or unprotected. Ruth looked at him for a long time. He could see her mind working behind those gray-green eyes, weighing options that weren't really options at all. Stay here and be destroyed by gossip and poverty, or get on a stranger's wagon and risk a different kind of destruction. Mrs. Hargrove told me this morning I have to be out by Friday, Ruth said quietly. She said my presence was an embarrassment to the establishment. Those were her exact words. An embarrassment. Mrs. Hargrove's a fool. Maybe. But she's a fool who controls the only bed I've got. Ruth picked up her canvas bag. It was small. Everything she owned in the world fit inside it. If we do this, we do it legal, proper, in front of the Reverend. Wouldn't have it any other way. And you understand, this is a business arrangement. I'll cook, clean, tend the garden, help with whatever needs doing. But I'm not property. I'm not a servant. If I'm your wife, I expect to be treated like one. You'll have my name and my protection. You'll eat before I do. You'll sleep by the fire while I take the loft. Nobody touches you, threatens you, or disrespects you while I'm breathing. Something flickered across Ruth's face, something she tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. All right, she said. I'll come with you. Silas nodded. Reverend's right inside. We'll do it now. Reverend Whitfield was a thin man with spectacles and a permanent look of worry. He looked from Silas to Ruth and back again, like he'd been handed a puzzle with missing pieces. Mr. Beckett, he said carefully, this is highly unusual. Unusual ain't illegal, Reverend. Can you marry us or not? Marriage is a sacred covenant. It requires prayer, reflection, counseling. It requires 2 willing people and a man of God, Silas said. We got all 3, unless you're not willing. Whitfield turned to Ruth. Miss Calloway, I must ask, are you entering this freely? No one is compelling you. No one's compelling me, Reverend. I'm choosing this. You understand you're binding yourself to a man you've known for... He checked his pocket watch as if it could measure the absurdity. Perhaps 30 minutes. I understand. Ruth's voice didn't waver. I also understand that the man who was supposed to stand here with me yesterday, a man I'd known for 6 months, sent his brother to tell me he'd found someone better. 30 minutes of honesty is worth more than 6 months of lies. Whitfield flinched. He looked at Silas again. I'll keep her safe, Silas said quietly. That's more than Phelps was willing to do. The Reverend sighed. Martha, he called toward the back room. I need a witness. Martha Whitfield appeared a soft-faced woman with kind eyes. She took one look at Ruth, and understanding spread across her features. She reached out and squeezed Ruth's hand. I'd be honored to stand for you, dear, she whispered. The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. No flowers, no music, no guests except Martha, who cried softly into her handkerchief. Reverend Whitfield read the words from his worn book, stumbling in places, as if the familiar phrases carried different weight today. Do you, Silas Beckett, take this woman? I do. Do you, Ruth Calloway, take this man? I do. Then, By the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Silas didn't kiss her. He extended his hand instead. Ruth looked at it, that rough, calloused working man's hand, and she took it. They shook once, firm and deliberate. A deal, sealed. Martha hugged Ruth at the door. "You've made a brave choice," she whispered. "I believe it's a good one." "Hey," outside Mrs. Hargrove stood on the boardwalk across the street, arms crossed, watching with thin-lipped disapproval. "Well," she called out, loud enough for the whole street to hear. That didn't take long. Couldn't keep one man, so she grabbed the first stranger who'd have her. Some women have no shame. Ruth stiffened. Silas felt the way her whole body went rigid beside him, felt the hurt she was trying to swallow. He stopped walking. "Silas," Ruth murmured, "leave it." He turned toward Mrs. Hargrove. The woman was maybe 50 bony, and sharp, the kind of person who fed on other people's misery, like it was Sunday supper. "Ma'am," Silas said, his voice low and even, "you just ran a woman out of your establishment because she got jilted by a man who broke his word. That makes you the one who ought to be ashamed. Not her." Mrs. Hargrove's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Well, I never. No, ma'am, I reckon you never." Silas took Ruth's arm gently. "Let's go." They walked to the wagon in silence. Henry Osborne was standing in his doorway, and he tipped his hat to Ruth with a small, respectful nod. "Mrs. Beckett," he said, first person to use her new name. Ruth's breath caught. "Mr. Osborne, you ever need anything, you send word. I'll make sure it gets on Silas's account." "Appreciate it, Henry," Silas said. He helped Ruth onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. The horse moved forward, and Copper Bluff fell away behind them. They rode in silence for the first hour. Not the awkward silence of strangers who couldn't find words. Something different. The weighted quiet of two people processing what they'd just done. The road stretched north through open grassland. The summer sun hot on their shoulders, dust rising from the wheels. Ruth sat straight back beside him, her canvas bag at her feet, her hands in her lap. She didn't fidget, didn't chatter, didn't fill the space with nervous talk the way most people would. Silas respected that. "You'll want to know what you're walking into," he said finally. "I would. Cabin's one room, sleeping loft up top, stone fireplace. I built it solid holds heat in winter stays, cool enough in summer if you keep the door open. Root cellar for storage. Barns 50 yards from the house." "How long have you been there?" 7 years. Alone. Alone. Ruth absorbed that. Why, it was the question everyone wanted to ask, but nobody dared. Why would a man who could clearly build and work and survive choose to do it in complete isolation for 7 years? "Had a life back in Pennsylvania," Silas said. "Lost it. All of it. Farm family, the woman I was supposed to marry. Left one night and never went back." "What happened?" "Bank took the farm after my father died. Couldn't keep up the payments. My brother Daniel got sick that same winter. Pneumonia. He was 19. Silas's jaw tightened. "My fiancée, Catherine, she told me she couldn't marry a man with no land and no future. Said she was sorry, but that was that." "She wasn't sorry," Ruth said quietly. Silas looked at her. "People who are truly sorry don't walk away," Ruth said. "They stay and help you rebuild. She wasn't sorry, she was just done." Something in Silas's chest shifted. In 7 years, no one had ever said that to him. No one had ever named the thing he'd felt, but couldn't articulate that Catherine's apology had been the cruelest part of all. "You're right," he said. "She was just done." They were quiet again. The land opened up around them, golden grass stretching to the foothills mountains, blue and distant against the sky. "My parents had a small farm outside of Billings," Ruth said after a while. "Nothing grand, but it was ours. When the scarlet fever came, it took them both inside 8 days. My mother went first. My father held on long enough to tell me to fight for the land." Her voice was steady, controlled. "My cousin Edgar showed up 3 weeks later with a lawyer. Said a single woman couldn't hold property. Judge agreed. I lost everything in one afternoon. Judge was wrong. Judge was paid. Edgar made sure of that." Ruth's hands tightened in her lap. "I went to the boarding house because I had nowhere else. Scrubbed floors for Mrs. Hargrove for 14 months. When Garrett Phelps proposed, I thought maybe things were turning around. He was older widowed, had a lumber business. It wasn't love, but it was respectable. It was a future. How long? 6 months of courtship. 6 months of being told I was enough. Then Eleanor Ridley came to town with her father's money and her family's name, and suddenly I wasn't enough anymore. Silas said nothing for a moment. Then, man who breaks his word ain't worth the ground he walks on. Doesn't matter who he marries instead. That's what I keep telling myself. Ruth paused. Some days, I even believe it. The sun was dropping toward the mountains when they reached the homestead. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop and sat there suddenly, seeing his place through a stranger's eyes. The cabin was small. Rough-hewn logs, sawed roofstone chimney. The yard was bare dirt. The fence needed mending in 3 places. Everything looked like what it was, a solitary man's outpost, built for function, not comfort. It ain't much, he said quietly. Ruth climbed down without waiting for help. She walked to the cabin, then turned slowly, taking in the barn, the garden plot, the grazing land, the mountains rising in every direction. When she turned back, her face had changed. Not disappointment, something else entirely. When I lost my parents' farm, she said, I swore I'd never have land again. Because having it and losing it was worse than never having it at all. She looked at the rough cabin, the bare yard, the wild land stretching endlessly. But standing here right now, I think I was wrong about that. It's yours now too, Silas said. Long as you want it. Then let's get to work. By nightfall, Ruth had already changed the cabin. Not physically, the walls were the same, the furniture hadn't moved. But there was a fire burning in the hearth, and the smell of coffee and frying salt pork filled the air. And something about the light and warmth made the place feel different, alive. Silas came in from tending the horses and stopped in the doorway. Ruth was at the cookstove sleeves, rolled up hair tied back, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who found purpose in work. Sit down, she said without turning around. Food's almost ready. He sat. She put a plate in front of him, salt, pork beans, cornbread, she'd made from supplies she'd found in his stores. You made cornbread, he said. Found the meal in your stores. Hope you don't mind. Haven't had cornbread in 7 years. Ruth paused, looked at him. 7 years without cornbread. That might be the saddest thing I've heard all day, and I had a very sad day. Something happened to Silas's face. Something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize it. He was almost smiling. They ate in silence that felt different from the road silence, warmer, seasoned with something neither of them was ready to name. I'll take the loft, Silas said when the meal was done. Fire keeps the main room warm. You'll be more comfortable down here. You don't have to give up your bed. Yes, I do. He stood, carrying his plate to the wash basin. Your birds like ours means I make sure you're safe and comfortable before I think about myself. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Garrett never once offered me anything without expecting something in return. Every kindness came with a price. I ain't Garrett. No, she said softly. You're not. He climbed the ladder to the loft. Below, he could hear Ruth moving quietly, banking the fire settling in. The cabin creaked in the summer wind. Outside, the creek murmured its endless song. He lay in the darkness, staring at the rough ceiling, trying to make sense of this day. This morning, he'd been alone same as every morning for 7 years. Now, there was a woman sleeping below him, a stranger with his name. And the cabin felt different in a way he couldn't explain. Not smaller, not invaded, fuller, like something that had been hollow for a very long time had finally been given weight. He didn't know if this was a mistake or a mercy. He only knew that turning that wagon around had been the most terrifying thing he'd done since leaving Pennsylvania, and that Ruth Calloway, Ruth Beckett, now had a strength in her quiet voice that made him think, maybe, just maybe, he hadn't been wrong to stop. Below him, Ruth's breathing slowed. She'd fallen asleep. Silas closed his eyes. For the first time in 7 years, he wasn't alone in the dark. And the strange, frightening truth was he didn't hate it. The first week established a rhythm. Silas rose before dawn. Ruth was already up fire-built coffee brewing. How she managed to wake before him every single morning became one of the small mysteries he stopped trying to solve. They ate breakfast together. Short conversations, practical. Fence in the south pasture needs work today. I'll handle the chickens and start on the garden. Creek water's clean. Draw from the east side where the current runs fastest. Understood. Then they separated. Silas to the fields, Ruth to the house and garden. Hours of hard work in summer, heat the kind of labor that left no room for self-pity or regret. But slowly, in the spaces between tasks, they began learning each other. Silas discovered that Ruth sang while she worked, low, soft melodies. He didn't recognize her voice carrying across the yard when she thought he was too far away to hear. He never told her he could hear, never wanted her to stop. Ruth discovered that Silas talked to the animals, full conversations as if the horse could understand every word. "You're being stubborn today," she overheard him say to the milk cow one morning. "Don't give me that look. I didn't ask for your opinion." She bit her lip to keep from laughing. On the fourth day, Ruth reorganized the entire kitchen, moved the cookware to lower shelves where she could reach without stretching, rearranged the pantry stores by what was used most, cleaned the stove until it gleamed. Silas noticed immediately, said nothing about it. But that evening, he brought in extra firewood without being asked and stacked it exactly where she could reach it easily. Small gestures, unspoken. A language forming between two people who didn't know how to talk about what mattered. On the sixth morning, Ruth was hanging wash on the line when a rider appeared on the trail from town. She shielded her eyes against the sun, watching the figure approach. Silas came from the barn moving fast, his hand resting on the rifle he'd grabbed from inside the door. "Stay near the house," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The rider came closer. Ruth's hands went still on the clothesline. She knew that horse, knew that riding posture, knew that expensive hat. "Silas," she said quietly. "That's Garrett. That's Garrett Phelps." Silas looked at her, looked at the approaching rider. His jaw set like iron. "Go inside." "No." "Ruth." I said no. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "Whatever he wants, he can say it to both of us." Garrett Phelps rode into the yard like he owned it. He was a big man, well-dressed, the kind of man who'd never had to work with his hands and wore that ease like a badge. He pulled up his horse and looked down at them with an expression that mixed surprise with something uglier. "Ruth," he said, "I heard you'd gone and done something foolish." "Mr. Phelps," Silas said, stepping forward, "you're on my land." Garrett looked at him like he was seeing a fence post that had learned to talk. "I'm not here for you, friend. I'm here for Ruth." "Mrs. Beckett." Garrett's eyebrows rose. "So it's true. You actually married this?" He gestured at Silas at the rough cabin at the dusty yard. "Ruth, have you lost your mind?" "Say what you came to say," Ruth said. "Then leave." Garrett dismounted. He was taller than Silas, broader, and he used his size the way men like him always did as a reminder that the world was built for people like him. "Eleanor's father is having second thoughts about the arrangement," Garrett said. "Financial difficulties. The marriage might not happen." He smiled. "I came to tell you there might still be a chance for us." The silence that followed was enormous. Ruth stared at him. "You're telling me you jilted me in front of the entire town, humiliated me, left me with nothing. And now that your better option might fall through, you're here to see if I'll take you back. I'm offering you a real-life Ruth, a proper house, a business standing in the community. Not," he waved dismissively at the homestead, "this. This," Ruth said, "is my home. You've been here a week. And in that week I've been treated with more respect than you showed me in 6 months." Garrett's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "No." Ruth's voice was quiet, but something in it could have cut steel. "I made a mistake when I said yes to you, when I believed a man who saw me as a placeholder, until someone with more money came along. That was the mistake. This," she gestured at Silas at the cabin at the land around them. "This is the correction." Garrett stepped forward. Silas stepped between them. "She gave you her answer," Silas said. "And I wasn't asking you. You're on my land talking to my wife. I'm making it my business." Silas didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. She said no. That means you get on your horse and ride back the way you came. Now. Garrett looked between them. Something shifted in his expression. The dawning realization that he'd lost something he hadn't valued until it was gone. "You'll regret this," he said to Ruth. "I don't think I will." Garrett mounted his horse. Oat looked down at them one last time. "That offer won't come again." "Good," Ruth said. He rode away. They watched until the dust settled and the trail was empty. Ruth's hands were shaking badly now. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to stop the trembling. Silas saw it. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're shaking." "I'm angry. There's a difference." She took a breath, released it slowly. 6 months, Silas. 6 months he told me I was what he wanted. And then I wasn't. And now his better deal falls apart, and he comes here expecting me to be grateful for scraps. You deserve better than scraps. Ruth looked at him. Really looked at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. This quiet, rough, solitary man who'd turned his wagon around for a woman he didn't know, who'd faced down Mrs. Hargrove without raising his voice, who'd given up his own bed without being asked and never mentioned it again. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm beginning to think I do." That night, after supper, they sat on the cabin steps, watching the sunset. The sky burned gold and copper above the mountains, and the air smelled of sage and warm grass. Silas? Yeah. Thank you. For today. For stepping between us. Didn't do anything you couldn't have handled yourself. Maybe not, but you didn't have to. And you did it anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Nobody's ever stood up for me like that. Not once in my whole life.
Silas turned one of his wooden carvings over in his hands, a small horse he'd been working on for weeks.
He held it out to her. "What's this?" Ruth asked. "Made it before I came back for you. Night before. Couldn't sleep, so I carved. Didn't know why I was making it." He paused. Maybe some part of me already knew. Ruth took the small horse carefully. It was beautiful, rough, but detailed, full of the kind of attention that came from caring about something too much to rush it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It ain't much. It's the most anyone's given me in 2 years." Her fingers closed around it gently. "I'll keep it forever." They sat together as the light faded, and somewhere in that silence, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet. Something quieter. Something like the first warm day after a long winter, when the ground softens just enough to remind you that things can grow again. Ruth held the small, carved horse against her heart, and Silas sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and for the first time in 7 years, the silence on his homestead didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a beginning. 3 weeks changed the homestead in ways Silas couldn't have predicted. Ruth didn't just work. She transformed. The kitchen became hers within days. Pots rearranged, herbs drying from the rafters, bread rising on the counter every morning, before Silas even came down from the loft. The garden she'd inherited as a patch of weeds and hard dirt was already showing rows of green. She worked from before dawn until after dark, and she never once complained. But it was the silence between them that changed most. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of small things, the way she saved him the first cup of coffee every morning, the way he stacked extra firewood by the door, without being asked, the way they moved around each other in the small cabin with increasing ease, like two people learning a dance they didn't know they'd agreed to. Silas caught himself hurrying back from the far pasture one afternoon. He'd been checking fences, a job that usually took him all day, because he'd stop and sit and stare at nothing comfortable in his solitude. But today he'd worked fast, finished early, and was riding home before the sun was even halfway down. Home. He'd never called it that before. It had always been the place, or the homestead. Now it was home, and the reason was standing in the garden with dirt on her hands, and her hair coming loose from its knot, humming one of those songs he pretended not to hear. "You're back early," Ruth said, shielding her eyes. "Fence was in better shape than I thought." "Liar. You rushed." Silas swung down from the horse. "Maybe." "Why?" He tied the horse to the rail and stood there for a moment, trying to find words for something he didn't fully understand. Quiet out there feels different now, he said finally. Used to feel like peace. Now it just feels like you're not there. Ruth's hands went still in the dirt. She looked up at him, and something crossed her face, surprise, then something warmer, then a careful pulling back like someone reaching toward a fire and remembering they'd been burned. Silas. I know, business arrangement. I ain't forgetting. He took the horse toward the barn. Just stating a fact. Ruth watched him go. She didn't say anything else. But that evening, she made apple cobbler from the dried fruit in the root cellar, and when Silas raised an eyebrow, she said, "It's Tuesday. Tuesdays should have cobbler." Since when? Since now. He almost smiled again. That was twice in 3 weeks. Some kind of record. The fourth week brought trouble. Silas was mending harness in the barn when Ruth appeared in the doorway, her posture rigid, her face tight with something he recognized immediately. "What's wrong?" "There's someone down by the creek. 2 people. Small." Silas grabbed the rifle and moved past her. "Stay here." "No." "Ruth. If they're children, they need to see a woman's face, not a rifle. I'm coming." He wanted to argue. Didn't. Something in her voice told him it would be a waste of breath. They walked together toward the creek, moving carefully through the tall grass. Silas spotted them first. 2 small figures huddled beneath a cottonwood, the bigger one positioned in front of the smaller one like a shield. A boy, maybe 12. And behind him, barely visible, a tiny girl clutching something against her chest. The boy saw them coming. He scrambled to his feet and pulled out a pocket knife so small it wouldn't have scared a rabbit. His hand was shaking so badly the blade caught the sunlight in wild flashes. "Don't come closer," the boy said. His voice cracked on every word. "I got a knife and I'll use it." Silas stopped immediately, held his hands out, rifle pointed at the ground. "We live here," he said calmly. "This is our land. Nobody's going to hurt you." That's what the last people said. The boy's eyes were wild, darting between Silas and Ruth. "Then they tried to take Birdie away from me." The little girl peered around her brother's legs. She was maybe 4, bone-thin, with tangled blonde curls and eyes so large they seemed to take up half her face. She was holding a cloth doll that looked like it had been dragged through every mile of whatever hell they'd walked through. Ruth made a soft sound. She crouched down slowly, making herself small. "My name's Ruth," she said gently. "What's yours?" The boy's grip on the knife wavered. "Jonas. She's Birdie, my sister." "Hello, Jonas. Hello, Birdie." Ruth kept her voice low and steady. "When did you last eat?" Jonas's defiance crumbled. "I don't, maybe 2 days ago. There were berries, but Birdie got sick from the wrong kind, and I—" His voice broke. "I tried. I've been trying." "I know you have," Ruth said. "I can see that. You've done an incredible job keeping her safe. We're fine. We're just passing through." "You're not fine, son," Silas said quietly. "You're starving, both of you. Don't call me son. You ain't my PA." But the fight was draining out of the boy's voice. Behind him, Birdie swayed on her feet. "I've got biscuits in the cabin," Ruth said. "Fresh this morning. Bacon too, and milk. Real milk, still cold." Birdie tugged on Jonas's shirt. "Jonas, I'm so hungry." The knife lowered slowly. "Just food," Jonas said. "Then we're leaving." "Just food," Ruth agreed. They walked back to the cabin. Birdie stumbled twice, and the second time Ruth picked her up without asking. The little girl didn't resist. She laid her head on Ruth's shoulder and closed her eyes, and Jonas watched with the desperate alertness of someone who'd learned that trusting people got you hurt. Inside, Ruth worked fast. Biscuits warmed on the stove bacon, sizzling in the pan. 2 cups of cold milk set on the table. She put the plates in front of the children and stepped back. For a moment, neither child moved. Then Birdie grabbed a biscuit with both hands, and Jonas seized a piece of bacon, and they ate with the frantic desperation of true starvation. Silas and Ruth exchanged a look. Whatever had happened to these children, it was bad. They waited until the worst of the hunger had passed. Until the eating slowed from desperate to merely eager. "Where are your folks, Jonas?" Silas asked. The boy's hand froze. He set the bacon down carefully. "Dead," he said. "Typhoid, both of them, 4 weeks ago." Ruth's hand went to her throat. 4 weeks. Where have you been? Walking. Our homestead was about 40 miles southeast. After Ma and Pa died, the neighbors came. Said they'd find families for us. Jonas's jaw tightened. They wanted to split us up. One family for me, different family for Bertie. Said nobody could take both. So you ran, Silas said. We left. There's a difference. Where were you heading? West. Heard there's settlements in Oregon where people need workers. I'm strong enough, and Bertie's quiet. She don't cause trouble. Oregon's 1,000 miles from here, Jonas. We made it this far. You barely made it this far. Silas leaned forward. Another week out there and you'd both be dead. You know that. Jonas's eyes filled. He blinked. I'm not you here and fighting it. Beside him, Bertie had stopped eating. She was staring at her brother with confused worry. Jonas said, she whispered. I'm fine, Bird. But his voice was raw. I'm fine. Ruth sat down across from them. Jonas, look at me. The boy raised his eyes reluctantly. You've kept your sister alive for 4 weeks with nothing. 4 weeks. That's not just brave, that's extraordinary. Most grown men couldn't do what you've done. Didn't have a choice. Yes, you did. You could have let them split you up. Could have gone to a family that would feed you and give you a bed and let someone else worry about Bertie. But you didn't. You chose her. Every single day for 4 weeks you chose her. Jonas's composure cracked. A tear escaped down his dirty cheek. Ruth looked at Silas. He saw the question in her eyes, the hope, the thing she was asking without words. Ruth, he said carefully. We have room, she said. We have food. There's more work here than 2 people can handle, and they have nowhere else to go. Taking on 2 children is different than what? Than taking on a stranger you married in 5 minutes. Her eyes held his. You turned your wagon around for me. I'm asking you to do the same thing for them. Jonas was watching them, barely breathing. Bertie had pressed herself against his side, sensing the weight of the moment without understanding it. Silas looked at the boy, 11 or 12, trying to be a man carrying a burden that would have crushed most adults. He looked at the little girl with her enormous eyes and her ragged doll. He thought about himself at 22, alone, broke, heading west because there was nothing behind him. All right, he said. They can stay. Jonas's head snapped up. Both of us together. Both of you, together. But there are rules. You work. You respect Ruth. You don't take stupid risks. Yes, sir, I can do anything if Bertie stays with me. Then it's settled. Ruth's face transformed. Relief and joy and something deeper purpose flooded her expression. She stood and moved to the children. First things first. Baths, clean clothes, and sleep. You're both exhausted. We don't need charity, Jonas said. But the fight was gone from his voice. It's not charity, Ruth said. It's family. The word hung in the air. Jonas stared at her. Bertie looked up at Ruth with those enormous eyes. Family, Bertie repeated. If you'll have us, Ruth said softly. Bertie held up her cloth doll. Daisy wants to stay, she told me. Then Daisy stays too. That evening, after the children had been bathed and dressed in cut-down clothes and fed again and tucked into makeshift beds behind a blanket partition, Silas and Ruth stood by the fire. We're a family now, Ruth said quietly. 4 people. That's what we are. Happen fast? The best things do. Silas stared into the flames. I don't know anything about raising children. You knew enough to say yes. That's where it starts. What if I fail them? You won't. I watched you today, the way you talked to Jonas, calm and honest. The way you agreed without me having to beg. That's what those children need. Steady, safe, real. We, Silas corrected. We're giving them that. Ruth's hand found his. He didn't pull away. They stood there connected, listening to the quiet breathing of sleeping children and the crackle of the fire. Silas. Yeah. Thank you for not saying no. Couldn't say no, not to that. Not anymore. 3 days later, the homestead had a new rhythm. Jonas threw himself into work like a man possessed, mucking the barn before dawn, hauling water, mending fences alongside Silas. The boy worked until his hands bled, wrapped them in cloth, and kept going. Silas recognized it. That desperate need to earn your place, to prove you were worth keeping. He found Jonas in the barn at first light, already mucking stalls. "Come with me," Silas said. "We're checking the north fence." "But I haven't finished. It'll keep. Come on." They rode together, Jonas seated in front on Silas's horse. The morning was clear, and warm summer settling into the valley. "You're pushing too hard," Silas said. "I'm earning my keep." "You're punishing yourself." Jonas stiffened. "I ain't." "When I first came here, I worked the same way. 18 hours a day. Worked till I couldn't stand. Told myself I was building something." Silas paused. "But I was really just running from the grief. Trying to outwork the pain." Jonas was quiet. "It doesn't work, son. No matter how many fences you fix or stalls you muck, the hurt's still there when you stop. Only way through grief is through it. You gotta feel it. If I feel it, I'll fall apart. Maybe, for a little while. But falling apart ain't the same as breaking. You fall apart, we'll catch you. That's what we're here for." "My PA." Jonas's voice cracked. "My PA told me to take care of Bertie. Last thing he said, 'You take care of your sister, Jonas. Promise me.' And I promised. And I've been trying, but I'm so tired. I'm so tired of being scared." "Then stop carrying it alone. I don't know how." "You start by letting someone else hold the weight for a while. That's not weakness. That's trust." The boy broke. Not dramatically, not with wailing or thrashing. He simply bent forward over the horse's neck and cried, his thin shoulders shaking, releasing weeks of accumulated terror and grief and the crushing responsibility of keeping a 4-year-old alive in the wilderness. Silas put his hand on the boy's back and held it there. Steady. Present. He didn't tell him to stop. Didn't tell him it was all right. Just let him cry. When the storm passed, Jonas sat up and wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Don't apologize for being human. Pa wouldn't have cried. Your PA would have been proud of every tear. Because they mean you loved him enough to grieve him. That's not weakness, Jonas. That's the strongest thing there is." Back at the cabin, they found Ruth and Bertie in the garden. Bertie was carefully watering seedlings, her small face intense with concentration. She looked up when she heard them. "Jonas, I'm growing food." "I see that bird. Good job." Ruth straightened, reading something in Silas's face. "How was the fence?" "Fence is fine, so are we." She understood. She always understood. That night, after the children were asleep, Ruth told Silas about Bertie's progress. She talked more today than the whole 3 days combined. Asked me about the chickens, the garden, the cow. Asked me if I was her mama now. "What did you say?" "I said I'd like to be if she'd let me." "What did she say?" Ruth smiled. "She said Daisy already decided I was. So it was settled." Silas shook his head. "That doll's got a lot of opinions. She gets it from Bertie." They sat in comfortable quiet. Then Ruth spoke again. "Jonas called you Pa today." Silas froze. "Oh, when he came back from the ride with you." Bertie asked where he'd been, and he said, "Out checking fences with Pa." I don't think he even realized he said it. Something tightened in Silas's chest. Something that hurt and healed at the same time. "I ain't earned that yet," he said. "You earned it the moment you said they could stay." A week passed, then 2. The homestead settled into something that felt almost normal, or what Silas imagined normal might feel like, since he'd never really had it. Then Tucker came. The traveling peddler rode in on a hot afternoon, his mule loaded with goods and his mouth loaded with gossip. Silas bought needles for Ruth and peppermint sticks for the children, and listened with half an ear, while Tucker talked about weather and cattle prices. Then Tucker's voice dropped. "I heard something you might want to know about Beckett. There's folks looking for 2 children. Boy named Jonas, little girl named Bertie. Neighbors from their parents' homestead. Put out word through every settlement in the territory." Silas's hand stopped reaching for his tobacco. "Offering a reward," Tucker continued. "Say the children were taken. Want them returned so they can be placed in proper homes. They weren't taken. They ran. I know that. You know that. But the law might see it different." Tucker's eyes were sharp. "You got those children here, Beckett. They're here. They're staying. Might cause trouble. Folks with legal claims. There are no legal claims. Ruth's voice came from behind them. She'd appeared in the doorway, her face pale, but her jaw set. Their parents are dead. The neighbors wanted to split them up. We took them in. They're ours. Tucker studied her. Studied Silas. Raised his coffee cup. Didn't see anything worth reporting here, he said. Far as I know, I never heard of any Jonas or Bertie. But you'd be smart to make it legal. Adoption papers? Guardianship. Something the law can't argue with. There's a judge coming through Pine Hollow end of next month. Name of Leland Cask. He handles these things? We'll be there, Silas said. After Tucker left, Ruth turned to Silas. Her composure held but barely. They can't take them, she said. Silas, they can't. I won't let anyone take those children. Nobody's taking them. You heard what he said. People are looking. There's a reward. What if someone comes here? What if... Ruth. He took her shoulders. First time he'd touched her deliberately since their handshake wedding. Listen to me. Nobody is taking those children. Not while I'm breathing. We'll go to Pine Hollow. We'll get the papers. We'll make it legal and permanent and ironclad. All right. She searched his face. Whatever she found there must have been enough because the panic in her eyes slowly receded. All right, she whispered. I gave you my word the day we married that you'd never be turned out or left behind. That goes for Jonas and Bertie too. They're family, and family doesn't get taken apart. Not here. Not ever. Ruth's eyes filled. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. Silas stood rigid for a moment. 7 years of isolation. Didn't dissolve overnight. Then slowly, carefully, he brought his arms around her. They stood like that in the afternoon heat holding each other, and it wasn't about romance or desire. It was about two people who had lost everything discovering that together they could protect what mattered most. Mama. They pulled apart. Bertie stood in the doorway, Daisy clutched against her chest, her face worried. Are you sad, Mama? Ruth wiped her eyes and crouched down. No, sweetheart, I'm not sad. Then why are you crying? Sometimes people cry when they're grateful. When they have something so precious, they're afraid of losing it.
Bertie, consider this. Like how I feel about Daisy. Exactly like that. Then don't be scared. Bertie walked forward and wrapped her small arms around Ruth's neck. I won't let anyone take us away. Jonas has a knife. Ruth laughed through her tears. That's very reassuring, sweetheart. Also, Pa's really big. He'll scare them. From the doorway, Silas felt something crack open inside him. Not break open. Like a door that had been sealed for 7 years, finally swinging wide, letting in light he'd forgotten existed. Pa. She'd said it like it was the most natural word in the world. That night, long after the children slept, Silas sat on the cabin steps, carving by moonlight. Ruth came and sat beside him. What are you making? Horse for Bertie. Daisy needs a friend to ride. Ruth leaned her head against the doorframe. Silas Beckett, the man who wanted nothing from anyone. Now he's carving toys for a 4-year-old at midnight. People change. You haven't changed. You've just stopped hiding. She paused. The man who turned his wagon around, who married a stranger, who said yes to 2 orphans, that man was always in there. You just kept him locked away. I had my reasons. I know you did. And they were good reasons. But I'm glad you stopped locking that door. She reached over and touched his hand. I'm glad you let us in. Silas looked at her in the moonlight. At this woman who'd been left behind and refused to stay down. Who'd taken his empty cabin and filled it with warmth and laughter and purpose. Who loved 2 orphan children as fiercely as if they'd been born to her. Ruth. Yes. This thing between us. It ain't just business anymore. You know that. I know. I don't have pretty words. Don't know how to say what I... Then don't say it. She squeezed his hand. Show me. The way you've been showing me every day since you turned that wagon around. That's enough. That's more than enough. He turned back to his carving. She stayed beside him. The creek sang in the darkness, and the children breathed softly inside. And the homestead that had sheltered one man's bitter solitude now held something Silas had stopped believing was possible. A family, imperfect, unexpected, built from broken pieces and desperate choices,
but real. Unshakably, undeniably real. And somewhere out there, Judge Leland Cask was coming to Pine Hollow. A man with the legal power to make this family permanent or tear it apart. Silas carved steadily, his hands sure on the wood, and planned for the fight ahead. They left for Pine Hollow on a Monday morning, all four of them in the wagon. Jonas sat up front with Silas, his back straight, his jaw tight. Ruth held Birdie in the wagon bed, the little girl clutching Daisy against her chest and chattering about everything they passed. But underneath the chatter, tension ran through all of them like a wire pulled taut.
What if the judge says no? Jonas asked, quietly, low enough that Birdie couldn't hear. He won't, Silas said. But what if he does? What if he decides we should go back? What if he splits us up? Jonas, look at me. Silas waited until the boy met his eyes. I made you a promise. Nobody splits this family. Not neighbor, not God himself.
What did I tell you about calling me, sir? A ghost of a smile. Yes, Pa. They camped that night beside a creek. Ruth made Johnny cakes on a flat stone, and Birdie insisted on helping her small hands patting the dough, with more enthusiasm than skill. Jonas sat close to the fire, whittling a stick into a sharp point with the pocket knife he still carried everywhere. You won't need that tomorrow, Ruth said gently. I always need it. Jonas didn't look up. Pa taught me that. Always be ready. Your PA was right about a lot of things, Silas said. But being ready doesn't mean being afraid. There's a difference. I ain't afraid. Didn't say you were. Jonas carved in silence for a moment. What was the judge's name again? The one Tucker mentioned. Leland Cask. You know anything about him? No. But we've got a lawyer, Richard Morrison. Henry Osborne recommended him. He's honest. Honest lawyers, Jonas muttered. My PA said those were like honest rattlesnakes. Might exist, but you'd be a fool to count on it. Your PA sounds like he was a smart man. Smartest man I ever knew. Jonas's voice thickened. Didn't save him, though. Birdie crawled into Ruth's lap, yawning. Mama will be peppermint sticks in town. I'm sure there will be, sweetheart. Jonas said the judge might take us away. Is that true? The silence was sudden and heavy. Jonas froze. Ruth's arms tightened around Birdie. Nobody's taking you anywhere, Ruth said firmly. We're going to town to sign papers that say you're ours forever. That's all. Promise. Promise. Daisy wants you to promise, too. Ruth kissed the top of Birdie's head. I promise Daisy, too. Birdie settled against Ruth's chest, satisfied. Within minutes, she was asleep. Jonas watched his sister with an expression that was far too old for 12. She trusts you, he said to Ruth. Completely. No hesitation. And you don't? I trust you both. I just don't trust the world. He set down his whittling. Every time I thought things were getting better, when Pa said the crop was coming in good, when the neighbors said they'd help after the funeral, something worse came. I'm waiting for the worst part. Maybe this time is different, Ruth said. Maybe, but I can't stop waiting. Silas understood that boy down to his bones. The inability to trust good fortune, the constant bracing for impact. He'd carried that same vigilance for 7 years before Ruth walked into his life. Jonas, Silas said. You listening? Always. The waiting doesn't stop on its own. You have to choose to stop it. One day, one moment at a time. You have to decide that what you've got right now is real, even though everything before taught you it wasn't. How did you do it? Stop waiting. I'm still working on it. But having you all here, that helps. Hard to expect the worst when the best is sitting right in front of you. Jonas looked at him, at Ruth, at Birdie sleeping in Ruth's arms. Then he nodded slowly, and something in his face relaxed, just enough to make him look for one moment like the 12-year-old boy he actually was. They reached Pine Hollow by midday. The town was busier than Silas remembered. More wagons, more people, a new building going up next to the general store. Progress creeping steadily into the territory. Henry Osborne spotted them immediately. Beckett family, Lord, look at you all. Those children have filled out since Tucker mentioned them. Henry, Silas said, we're here to see Morrison and the judge. Henry's face sobered. Judge Cask arrived yesterday, set up in the back room of the hotel. He's been hearing cases all morning. He leaned closer and dropped his voice. Fair warning, Silas. Cask's got a reputation. Strict. By the book. Doesn't much care for unconventional arrangements. Our arrangement's about to become very conventional, Ruth said. That's why we're here. Just be prepared is all I'm saying. Man's not known for his warmth. Richard Morrison's office was above the bank, cluttered with law books and papers. Morrison was thin, precise, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that wouldn't stay on his nose. He'd already prepared the guardianship and adoption papers, based on information Silas had sent ahead by letter. The legal situation is straightforward, Morrison said, spreading documents across his desk. Parents deceased, no surviving relatives, with documented claims. The children fled of their own volition. You've provided shelter, food, and care for over a month. All of this favors your petition. Then what's the problem? Silas asked. Judge Cask. Morrison pushed his spectacles up. He's thorough. He'll want to inspect your circumstances personally. He'll interview the children separately. And he has a particular concern about how shall I put this marriages of convenience being used to create the appearance of family stability. Ruth stiffened. Our marriage is legal. I'm not questioning that, Mrs. Beckett. I'm telling you what Cask will question. A man who lived alone for 7 years suddenly marries a woman he met that same day, and within weeks takes in 2 orphan children. Cask will want to be certain this isn't an arrangement designed to acquire free labor. Free labor? Silas's voice went dangerous and low. Those are my children. I know that. You know that. We need Cask to know that. Morrison stacked the papers neatly. My advice. Be honest. Be yourselves. Let the children speak for themselves. And whatever you do, don't lose your temper. Silas and Morrison exchanged a long look. I'll do my best. Do better than your best. Cask has denied adoptions before. He takes it seriously. They left Morrison's office and walked to the hotel. Jonas held Bertie's hand, his knuckles white. Ruth walked beside Silas, close enough that their shoulders touched. We'll be fine, she said, more to herself than to him. We'll be fine, he repeated. Judge Leland Cask was not what Silas expected. He'd imagined a large man imposing. Instead, Cask was small, thin-faced, maybe 60, with sharp, gray eyes that missed nothing and a voice that carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He sat behind a makeshift desk in the hotel's back room, his black coat buttoned to the throat, despite the summer heat. He did not stand when they entered, did not smile, did not offer pleasantries. Mr. and Mrs. Beckett, he said, looking at the file Morrison had submitted. I've reviewed your petition. Sit down. They sat. Jonas and Bertie remained standing until Cask looked at them. You two children. There are chairs. Jonas pulled a chair close to Bertie, and they sat together, the boy's arm around his sister's shoulders. Cask watched this with no visible reaction. Mr. Beckett, I'll be direct. Your petition raises several concerns, such as, you lived alone for 7 years, with no social connections, no church membership, no community involvement. Your marriage was conducted the same day you met your wife with no courtship period and no witnesses beyond the Reverend and his wife. Cask's eyes moved to Ruth. Mrs. Beckett, prior to this marriage, you were publicly jilted by another man and had no means of supporting yourself. That's correct, Ruth said evenly. And within weeks of this hasty marriage, you took in 2 runaway children whose neighbors had been arranging proper placement.
Their neighbors were splitting them up, Silas said. Their neighbors were following standard practice for orphan children in the territory. One family takes one child, another takes the other. It may not be ideal, but it ensures each child receives adequate care. It rips families apart, Ruth said. It places children in stable homes, Mrs. Beckett. Which brings me to my central concern. Cask folded his hands on the desk. How can I be certain that 2 people who have known each other for barely 2 months, living on an isolated homestead, with no community oversight, are suitable parents for these children? Because those children are alive, Silas said. A month ago they were starving in the wilderness. Now they're fed, clothed, educated, and together.
That should count for something. It counts for something. It doesn't count for everything. Cask turned to Morrison. I'll need to speak with the children privately. Of course, Morrison said.
No!
Jonas said suddenly. Every head turned toward him. I'm not leaving Bertie alone with a stranger, Jonas said. His voice shook, but he didn't back down. Last time adults wanted to talk to us privately, they tried to put us in separate wagons. Cask studied the boy. Young man, I'm a judge of the territorial court. I'm not going to harm you or your sister. That's what the neighbors said too. The room went silent. Cask's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not softening exactly, but something moved behind those sharp eyes. I'll speak with both of you together, Cask said. Will that be acceptable? Jonas looked at Silas. Silas nodded. All right, Jonas said. Together. Mr. and Mrs. Beckett, Mr. Morrison, please wait outside. Ruth knelt beside Bertie. Sweetheart, the judge wants to talk to you and Jonas for a few minutes. We'll be right outside the door. Why can't you stay? Because the judge needs to hear from you. Just you and Jonas. Tell him the truth about everything. All right. Bertie clutched Daisy tighter. Will you be here when I come out? I will always be here when you come out. Always. The door closed. Silas, Ruth, and Morrison stood in the narrow hallway. The walls felt like they were closing in. Ruth's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. What's he asking them? She whispered. Standard questions, Morrison said. How they're treated. Whether they feel safe. Whether they want to stay. Of course they want to stay. Then they'll say so, and then that will carry significant weight. Minutes passed. 5. 10. Silas paced the short hallway, his boots hitting the floorboards in a steady, heavy rhythm. Ruth stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the closed door. What if he's convincing them? She said. What if he's telling them they'd be better off somewhere else? Jonas is vulnerable. He wants to trust authority, even when authorities failed him. What if... Ruth. Silas stopped pacing. Those children know who their family is. No judge is going to talk them out of that. You don't know that. I know Jonas. And I know Bertie. They're ours. The door opened. Cask appeared in the doorway. His face revealed nothing. Come back in. They filed in. Jonas and Bertie were still sitting together. Bertie was smiling. Jonas's face was unreadable. Cask returned to his desk and sat down. He was quiet for a long moment, reviewing his notes, and the silence was excruciating. I've spoken with both children, he said finally. Separately, despite the boy's initial objection, he agreed once I explained my reasons. Ruth's breath caught. The girl Bertie told me. Cask paused and something changed in his voice. Just slightly. Just enough. She told me that her mama makes biscuits every morning, and her papa carved a horse for Daisy, and that she's growing food in the garden, and that Jonas doesn't have nightmares as much anymore because Pa told him he doesn't have to carry everything alone. Ruth pressed her hand over her mouth. The boy Jonas was more reserved. He told me about his parents' death, about the neighbor's plan to separate them, about walking for 4 weeks with his sister, about finding your homestead. Cask set down his notes. He also told me that in his entire life, the only people who ever asked what he wanted, not what was convenient, or practical, or standard, were the two of you. Silas couldn't speak. His throat had closed around something too large for words. I've denied adoptions before, Cask continued. I've removed children from homes I deemed inadequate. I take this responsibility seriously because children cannot advocate for themselves. He looked directly at Silas, then at Ruth. But these children can, and they have, clearly, consistently, and without any indication of coaching or coercion. Morrison leaned forward. Then you'll approve the petition. I'm granting full legal guardianship effective immediately, with formal adoption to be finalized within 90 days pending a follow-up review. The children are to remain in the custody of Silas and Ruth Beckett. Their legal names will be recorded as Jonas Beckett and Bertie Beckett. Jonas made a sound. A small choked sound that he tried to swallow and couldn't. Furthermore, Cask said, I'm noting for the record that any parties from the children's previous community who attempt to interfere with this placement will be subject to legal action. These children have a family. The court recognizes it. Ruth was crying. She wasn't trying to hide it anymore. She reached for Jonas, who fell against her, his rigid composure finally shattering. Bertie tugged on Silas's hand. "Papa, why is everybody crying?" Silas picked her up. She was so small, so impossibly light, this child who'd walked 40 miles, on stick-thin legs, with nothing but a cloth doll and a brother's fierce love. "Because we're happy, Bird. Crying means sad. Sometimes crying means you got something you were afraid to hope for." Bertie thought about this. "Like when I found Daisy after I dropped her in the river and Jonas went in to get her. Exactly like that." Bertie wrapped her arms around his neck. "I love you, Papa." 3 words. So small. So ordinary. Said by millions of children to millions of fathers every single day. But Silas Beckett had never heard them before, and they broke him open in a way that 7 years of solitude and grief and silence never could. "I love you too, Bird," he managed. "More than you'll ever know." Cask watched all of this, and when Silas looked at the judge, he saw something he hadn't expected. A thin line of moisture along the old man's lower lashes quickly blinked away. "Sign the papers," Cask said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "All of you. Morrison will witness." They signed. Jonas wrote his new name, Jonas Beckett, in careful letters, pressing hard with the pen, as if trying to engrave it permanently into the paper. Bertie couldn't write yet, so Ruth guided her hand in making an X, and the little girl examined it with enormous satisfaction. "That's me," she announced. "Bertie Beckett. It sounds like a bird name. I like it." Outside the hotel, the afternoon sun was hot, and the street was busy, but none of it registered. They stood together on the boardwalk, 4 people holding legal papers that said what their hearts had known for weeks. They were a family. "I need to—" Jonas started, then stopped. He looked at Silas, and his face was younger than it had been in months, open, unguarded. "I need to say something. Say it. When Bertie and I were walking after Ma and Pa died, there was a night, the worst night. We were in the rain, and Bertie was sick from the bad berries, and I didn't have anything to give her. No food, no shelter, nothing. She was crying, and I was holding her. And I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. 2 kids alone, and nobody in the whole world cares." Ruth reached for his hand. He let her take it. "And I prayed. I don't pray much, but I did that night. I said, God, if you're real, send somebody. Anybody. Just don't let my sister die." And then I stopped praying, because I figured nobody was listening. Jonas's voice broke. "But somebody was, because 2 days later we found your creek, and you found us." "Jonas," Ruth whispered, "I just wanted you to know, both of you, that whatever happens next, whatever comes, you were the answer. You were what God sent." Silas pulled the boy against him, held him hard. Ruth wrapped her arms around them both, and Bertie squeezed in from below, determined not to be left out. Henry Osborne, watching from his store window, quietly turned the open sign to closed and wiped his eyes on his apron. They walked through town after that. Silas bought peppermint sticks for the children and fabric for Ruth. Jonas wanted a book, any bookish, and Silas bought him 3. Bertie found a ribbon for Daisy's hair and declared it the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. At the chapel they stopped. Reverend Whitfield was outside, tending the small garden by the door. Reverend Silas said, "Got some news. We've adopted 2 children, legal and official." Whitfield's face broke into the widest smile Silas had ever seen on the man. "Mr. Beckett, Mrs. Beckett, this is wonderful, truly wonderful. Let me record it in the parish register." Inside the chapel, Whitfield wrote their names in his large book. Jonas Beckett, Bertie Beckett, adopted children of Silas and Ruth Beckett. Bertie watched the pen move across the page with breathless fascination. "That's my name," she said. "In a real book." "In a real book," Whitfield confirmed. Forever." Martha Whitfield appeared with cookies she'd been baking. She hugged Ruth, hugged the children, and whispered something in Silas's ear that made him blink hard. "I told you, she made a good choice," Martha said. I was right." As they prepared to leave town, Ruth noticed someone watching from across the street. A woman well-dressed, standing beside an expensive carriage. Eleanor Phelps, Garrett's wife. The 2 women's eyes met across the dusty street. Eleanor looked at Ruth, at Silas beside her, at Jonas, carrying books under his arm, at Bertie, skipping along with her ribbon-wearing doll, and something moved across her face. Not jealousy exactly. Something closer to recognition. The understanding that Ruth Calloway, the woman her husband had thrown away, had found something real. Ruth nodded. A small, dignified acknowledgement. Nothing more. Eleanor nodded back. Then Silas helped his family into the wagon, and they rode out of Pine Hollow, the adoption papers folded carefully in Ruth's pocket, the peppermint sticks already half-eaten, and Bertie singing a nonsense song about a bird named Beckett, who lived in a garden and never flew away, because she'd already found the best home in the whole world. Jonas sat up front with Silas, his new books on his lap, his shoulders straighter than they'd been since his parents died. Pa. Yeah. When we get home, can you teach me to work leather? I want to make something for Ma, for her birthday. When's her birthday? I don't know, but she should have one. Everyone should have one. Silas looked at his son, this boy who'd been through hell and come out the other side with his capacity for love, not just intact, but strengthened. This boy who thought about making gifts for the woman who'd chosen to be his mother. We'll find out when it is, Silas said, and we'll make her something she'll never forget. Jonas smiled. A real smile. Full and unguarded and young. Behind them, in the wagon bed, Ruth held Bertie against her chest and listened to her daughter's breathing slow into sleep. She touched the adoption papers in her pocket, feeling the weight of them, the permanence. Legal, binding, forever. She pressed her lips against Bertie's hair and closed her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd stood outside a chapel with nothing. No family, no future. No reason to believe anything would ever be good again. Now she had a husband who'd turned his wagon around for her. A son who'd walked through fire to protect his sister. A daughter who'd named a cloth doll Daisy and trusted the world again because someone had been trustworthy. Ruth Calloway Beckett held her sleeping child and made a silent vow. She would protect this family with everything she had. Every breath, every ounce of strength, every fiber of the stubborn, unbreakable will that had kept her standing outside that chapel when everything inside her wanted to collapse. Nobody would ever take this away. Not ever. The ride home felt different than any journey Silas had taken in 7 years. Bertie slept most of the way curled against Ruth like a cat in sunlight. Jonas read one of his new books, lips moving silently over words, occasionally looking up to check that everything was still real, the wagon, the road, the family around him. Ruth hummed one of her quiet melodies, the adoption papers tucked safely inside her dress. And Silas drove. Steady hands on the reins, steady heart in his chest. For the first time since Pennsylvania, he wasn't heading toward solitude. He was heading toward something full. They were 2 miles from the homestead when Jonas closed his book and said, "Riders behind us." Silas glanced back. 2 men on horseback moving fast, closing the distance. "Oh, Ruth," Silas said quietly. "Take the children down into the wagon bed." "Silas! Now!" Ruth moved without further argument, pulling Bertie against her, pushing Jonas down. The boy resisted. "I can help." "You can help by keeping your sister safe. Do it." Jonas obeyed. Silas reached beneath the seat and laid the rifle across his lap. He didn't slow the wagon, didn't speed up, just kept the horse at a steady pace and waited. The riders came alongside. 2 men, trail-dusty, rough-looking. The bigger one had a badge pinned to his vest, Deputy Sheriff Territorial. The smaller one Silas didn't recognize, but there was something in his face that said trouble. Sharp features, narrow eyes, the kind of man who enjoyed delivering bad news. "Silas Beckett," the deputy called out. "That's me. Deputy Willis Territorial Sheriff's Office. Need you to stop the wagon." Silas pulled the horse to a halt. His hand stayed near the rifle. "What's this about?" Willis pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got a complaint filed against you. Man named Edgar Pruitt from down near Billings. Says you're harboring 2 children, Jonas and Bertie, who were placed under community guardianship after their parents' deaths." Ruth sat up in the wagon bed, her face white. "Those children were never placed. They ran because the community wanted to split them up. Ma'am, I'm not here to argue the circumstances. I'm here to serve notice." Willis held out the paper. "Pruitt's filed a legal challenge to your adoption petition.
Says he's got prior claim as the nearest appointed guardian. Pruitt! Jonas's voice came from the wagon bed, sharp with panic. Edgar Pruitt. He's the one who wanted to send Bertie to the Mercer family 40 miles away. He doesn't care about us. He just wants the reward. The smaller man spoke for the first time. The reward's got nothing to do with it, boy. Your parents' neighbors made lawful arrangements for your care. Running off doesn't change that. And who are you? Silas asked. Name's Virgil Holt. I represent Mr. Pruitt's interests in this matter. You're a lawyer? I am. Then you should know we've already been before Judge Cask. He approved the adoption this morning. Full legal guardianship signed and filed. Holt's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise quickly masked. Judge Cask can approve what he likes. A legal challenge supersedes preliminary approval. There'll be a hearing. When? 2 weeks. Pine Hollow Courthouse. Until then, the children are to remain in your custody, but you're prohibited from leaving the territory. We ain't going anywhere, Silas said. Willis looked uncomfortable. He was a lawman doing his job, not a man who enjoyed separating families. I'm sorry about this, Mr. Beckett. Just delivering papers. You've delivered them. Anything else? No, sir, that's all. The riders turned and headed back toward town. Silas sat motionless on the wagon seat, the legal papers clenched in his fist, his knuckles white around the rifle. Ruth climbed up beside him. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steel. They can't do this. Cask already approved it. They're challenging the approval. On what grounds? Silas unfolded the papers and read through the legal language, slow and careful. Says here that Edgar Pruitt was designated as informal guardian by the community. Says the children were removed without his consent. Says our adoption was conducted without proper notification of interested parties. Interested parties? Ruth's voice rose. That man wanted to ship Bertie 40 miles away from her brother. His only interest is the reward money. Mama! Bertie's face appeared over the wagon side, frightened. Why are you yelling? Ruth forced her voice calm. I'm not yelling, sweetheart. Everything's fine. The men with horses were scary. They're gone now. We're going home. Jonas hadn't moved from the wagon bed. He sat perfectly still, his new books forgotten his face, wearing that old expression, the one from before the one that said he'd been right all along, to wait for the worst. It's happening again, he said flatly. They're coming for us. Nobody's coming for you, Silas said. He turned to face the boy directly. Jonas, look at me. We have signed papers from a territorial judge. We have a lawyer. We have the law on our side. The law took my parents' farm. The law let my cousin steal everything. Ruth's voice was bitter. I know what the law can do. This is different. How? Silas set the rifle down, took both her hands. Because this time we fight, together, with everything we've got. They drove home in silence. That night, after the children were asleep, Silas and Ruth sat at the table with the legal papers spread between them. Ruth had read through them 3 times, and each reading made her angrier. Pruitt's claiming he was their appointed guardian, but there was no formal appointment, no court order, just neighbors deciding among themselves who'd take which child. Morrison will know how to handle this. And if he can't, if this Holt is smarter, or Pruitt's got money to grease the right hands, then we find another way. Ruth pressed her palms against the table. I can't lose them, Silas. I survived being jilted. I survived losing my parents, and my land, and my dignity. But I cannot survive losing those children. It would kill me. It won't come to that. You don't know that. I know me, and I know you. And I know that anyone who tries to take our children is going to face the 2 most stubborn people in Montana Territory. Ruth almost laughed. Almost. That's your planned stubbornness. Stubbornness, a good lawyer, and the truth. Pruitt doesn't want those kids. He wants money. We just have to prove it. The next morning, Silas rode to Pine Hollow alone. Fast ride, no stops. He found Morrison in his office, already aware of the situation. Holt filed the challenge yesterday afternoon, Morrison said, pulling out a fresh stack of papers. Immediately after you left town. He was waiting. Waiting. He knew about Cask's ruling before the ink was dry. Someone told him.
My guess is Mrs. Hargrove. She's got connections to everyone's business, and she never liked your wife. Can he win? Morrison leaned back in his chair. Legally, his case is thin. There was no formal guardianship order. The community's arrangement was informal at best, and Judge Cask's ruling carries significant weight. But Holt is clever. He's not really arguing the law. He's arguing character. He'll try to paint you and Ruth as unsuitable. Hasty marriage isolation, no community, ties no church attendance. He'll say the children deserve a proper home with established families. Those children have a proper home. I know that. But Cask won't be the judge at this hearing. It'll be Judge Whitmore from Helena. Different man, different standards. What kind of man? Conservative, traditional, values propriety and social standing. Morrison paused. The kind of man who might look at a marriage conducted in 5 minutes between strangers and question whether it constitutes a stable foundation for raising children. Silas felt the ground shifting beneath him. What do? We build our case the same way you built your homestead. One solid piece at a time. I need character witnesses. Your neighbors, the Reverend, anyone who can speak to your fitness as parents. I need documentation of the children's well-being, health, education, daily routine. And I need you and Ruth to present yourselves as exactly what you are, a genuine family. We are a genuine family. Then all we have to do is prove it. Silas rode home with a list of tasks and a cold knot of fear in his gut that no amount of determination could entirely dissolve. The 2 weeks before the hearing were the hardest of their lives. Ruth threw herself into preparation with fierce energy. She documented everything, the children's daily routine, their meals, their education. She wrote down every book Jonas had read, every word Bertie had learned, every skill they developed on the homestead. She created a detailed account of their care that Morrison said was the most thorough he'd ever seen. You should have been a lawyer, he told her. I'm a mother. Same thing, but with higher stakes. Silas rode to the Draper homestead 9 miles south. He'd met Thomas Draper only twice, brief encounters at the general store. But Tucker had mentioned the Drapers were good people, established, respected. Thomas Draper was a big man in his 50s, weathered and calm. His wife, Margaret, was the kind of woman who fed anyone who walked through her door and asked questions later. Mr. Beckett, Draper said, surprised. Didn't expect to see you. Need help, Silas said. The words cost him. 7 years of self-sufficiency made asking for anything feel like swallowing glass. Need character witnesses for a hearing. Somebody's trying to take our children. Draper's face hardened. Take your children on what grounds? Silas explained. Draper listened without interrupting. When Silas finished, Draper stood and extended his hand. Margaret and I will be there, and I'll speak to the Hendersons and the Tatums. They'll come too. You don't know us. I know you rode 9 miles to ask for help raising children that aren't yours by blood. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you are. Back at the homestead, Jonas was struggling. The old fear had returned worse than before. He'd stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping. He worked from dawn until dark, reverting to that desperate pattern of trying to earn his place through exhaustion. Ruth found him in the barn at midnight, mucking stalls by lantern light. Jonas, come inside. Can't sleep. I know, come inside anyway. He followed her to the cabin. Silas was still awake, carving by the fire. He looked up when Jonas came in and saw the boy's hollow eyes, the rigid set of his jaw. Sit down, son. Jonas sat. His hands were shaking. Talk to me, Ruth said, settling beside him. What if they take us? What if this Pruitt convinces the judge and they put Bertie in one house and me in another? She won't survive it. She barely survived the walking. If they take her away from me, they won't. You can't promise that. People have been promising me things my whole life and they keep breaking those promises. Pa promised he'd get better. The neighbors promised they'd keep us together. Garrett Phelps promised to marry you. Promises don't mean anything. The words hit Ruth like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She'd learned the same lesson the same hard way. You're right, she said quietly. Promises get broken. People fail you. The world doesn't care what you've been through or what you deserve. Jonas stared at her. But here's what I know, Jonas. Your PA kept his promise to love you until the day he died. The neighbors broke their promise, but you kept yours. You kept Bertie safe. Silas promised me a roof and protection the day he married me, and he hasn't broken that promise once. She took the boy's face in her hands. Some promises hold. You just have to learn which ones to trust. How do I learn that? By watching what people do, not what they say. Have we fed you every day? Yes. Given you a bed closed books taught you, protected you? Yes. Then trust that. Trust what you've seen with your own eyes, not some stranger with a legal paper. Jonas looked at Silas. Pa, are you scared? Silas could have lied. Could have played the strong, unshakable father, but this boy had been lied to enough. Terrified, Silas said. More scared than I've ever been. Because losing you and Bertie would be worse than anything I've been through, and I've been through a lot. Then what do? We show up. We tell the truth. We let the people who know us speak for us. And we trust that a man with the power to judge us will see what's real. He paused. And if all that fails, we fight harder. And if fighting doesn't work, then we keep fighting. There's no version of this where I stop. Jonas exhaled, long shuddering like a man setting down a weight he'd carried too long. Okay, he said. Okay. Bertie woke screaming that night. Not a nightmare about the walking or the hunger or her parents' death. Something new. The man took Jonas away, she sobbed, clinging to Ruth. The scary man with the papers took Jonas, and he put him in a wagon, and I couldn't find him, and he was gone. Jonas is right here, sweetheart. Ruth carried Bertie to where Jonas lay on his pallet. The boy sat up immediately, reaching for his sister. I'm here, Bird. I'm right here. Don't go. Don't let them take you. Nobody's taking me anywhere. Bertie crawled into her brother's arms, and Jonas held her, rocking her the way he'd done for 4 weeks in the wilderness, the way he'd done since the night their parents died. Ruth sat beside them, one hand on each child's back. Silas stood in the doorway of the main room watching. His wife, his children, this family built from wreckage and determination and love. He thought about the hearing, about Judge Whitmore, about Holt and Pruitt, and their legal challenge. He thought about the possibility, the real terrifying possibility, that a man in a black coat could look at this family and decide it wasn't enough. And he made a decision. In the morning, he saddled his horse and rode to Pine Hollow, not to Morrison's office, to the hotel where Judge Cask was still conducting business, before moving on to the next settlement. Cask looked up from his desk surprised. Mr. Beckett, I heard about the challenge. I need your help. I've already submitted my ruling. It's on the record. That's not what I'm asking. Silas removed his hat. I'm asking you to be present at the hearing, not as a judge, as a witness. You spoke with my children. You saw what we've built. You know the truth. Cask studied him for a long moment. That's highly unusual. My family's highly unusual.
What we've got. You understand that my presence could be seen as prejudicial, that Holt could argue I'm influencing the proceedings. I understand that without you, Whitmore's only going to hear one side, the side that says two strangers shouldn't be raising children they found by a creek. And the other side is 4 people who chose each other when nobody else would have them. 4 people building something real out of nothing. That's the side that needs a voice. Cask removed his spectacles and polished them slowly. I've been a judge for 23 years, Mr. Beckett. I've seen every kind of family arrangement this territory can produce. Marriages of convenience, adoptions of necessity children, raised by grandparents, neighbors, strangers. The ones that work aren't the ones that look proper on paper. They're the ones where the people involved would burn the world down before letting go. He put his spectacles back on. I'll be there.
Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Whitmore's his own man. My word carries weight, but it doesn't carry guarantees. Your word carries truth. That's enough. Silas rode home faster than he'd ridden in years. When he told Ruth, she grabbed his shirt with both hands and pulled him close. You beautiful, stubborn man. she whispered against his chest. "That's what you married. Best decision I ever made." The night before the hearing, none of them slept well. Ruth lay awake, running through every possible question, every argument, every scenario. Silas stared at the ceiling of the loft, his mind churning. Jonas sat up in his bed, his pocket knife turning over and over in his hands. Only Bertie slept soundly. Daisy tucked under her chin, dreaming whatever dreams 4-year-olds dream, when they feel safe enough to stop being afraid. At first light, they dressed in their best clothes. Ruth wore the blue dress she'd sewn for herself, her hair pinned up carefully. Silas wore a clean shirt and his only good coat. Jonas had polished his boots until they shone. Bertie wore a dress Ruth had made from flour sacks, but she'd added lace at the collar, and the little girl looked as proud as if she were wearing silk. "Ready?" Silas asked, standing by the wagon. Ruth took his hand. Jonas took Bertie's. "Ready," Ruth said. They climbed into the wagon and headed for Pine Hollow, toward a courtroom, toward a judgment, toward the moment that would determine whether the family they'd built would stand or shatter. Bertie sang her nonsense song about the bird named Beckett. Jonas clutched his books. Ruth held the adoption papers against her heart, and Silas drove his jaw, set his hands steady on the reins, heading toward the fight of his life with everything he loved sitting behind him in a wagon. Whatever happened in that courtroom, one thing was certain. He would not lose them. He would not let them be taken apart. Not while he was breathing. Not ever. The Pine Hollow courthouse was a single room above the land office, barely large enough for 20 people. By the time the Becketts arrived, it was already full. Thomas Draper sat in the front row with his wife Margaret. Behind them, the Henderson family, James, Martha, and 2 of their grown sons, Reverend Whitfield and his wife. Henry Osborne, who'd closed his store for the first time in 12 years. Even old Tucker, the peddler, who'd ridden 30 miles when word reached him. Silas hadn't expected any of them. He stopped in the doorway, Ruth beside him, the children behind them, and stared at the rows of faces. "Told you I'd bring people," Draper said simply. "Didn't figure you'd mind." "I don't mind," Silas managed. His throat was tight. Ruth squeezed his hand. "We're not alone in this." "No," he said. "We're not." On the other side of the room sat Virgil Holt, crisp and composed in a city suit. Beside him was a man Silas hadn't seen before, thin, sallow-faced, with restless eyes that kept darting toward the children. Edgar Pruitt, the man who wanted Jonas and Bertie, returned. Jonas spotted Pruitt and went rigid. His hand found Bertie's and locked around it. "That's him," Jonas whispered to Silas. "That's the one who told us Bertie would go to the Mercers. He said I should be grateful anyone wanted a scrawny kid with a mouth on him. Stay calm, son." "I am calm. I'm also right." Judge Whitmore entered through a side door. He was tall, silver-haired, immaculate in his black coat. His face had the polished neutrality of a man who'd learned to hide his thoughts behind procedure. He sat behind the desk that served as his bench and surveyed the room. "This is a hearing on the matter of Pruitt versus Beckett, regarding the custody and adoption of the minor children Jonas and Bertie. Mr. Holt, you represent the petitioner." "I do, Your Honor." "Mr. Morrison, you represent the respondents." "I do, Your Honor." "Very well. Mr. Holt, present your case." Holt stood. He was smooth-practiced. The kind of lawyer who made simple things sound complicated, and complicated things sound damning. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of proper procedure. When Jonas and Bertie's parents died of typhoid, the community of Mill Creek assumed collective responsibility for the children's welfare. My client, Edgar Pruitt, was designated as their informal guardian. He arranged placement with 2 reputable families, the Granger family for Jonas, the Mercer family for Bertie. "They wanted to split us up," Jonas said loudly. "Young man," Whitmore said, "you'll have your chance to speak." "Not now." Jonas's jaw clamped shut. Ruth put her hand on his shoulder. Holt continued. "Before these arrangements could be finalized, the children fled. They were found weeks later on the Beckett homestead, taken in by a couple who had been married for less than a month, and who made no effort to notify the children's community of their whereabouts." "We didn't know who to notify," Silas said. Mr. Beckett, same rules apply. You'll speak when addressed. Whitmore's tone was firm, but not hostile. Continue, Mr. Holt. Your Honor, Mr. and Mrs. Beckett are no doubt well-meaning people. But good intentions don't constitute legal authority. They married on the same day they met. They have no experience raising children. They live in extreme isolation with no community oversight, no church membership, no social connections beyond what they've hastily assembled in recent weeks. Holt paused for effect. The children deserve stable, established homes with families who can provide proper upbringing. My client simply wants what's best for them. Morrison stood. Your Honor, may I respond? Go ahead. Mr. Holt speaks of proper procedure and established homes. Let me address both. First, there was no formal guardianship order. No court appointed Mr. Pruitt as guardian. A group of neighbors made informal decisions about 2 orphan children without consulting the children themselves or any legal authority. That's not procedure, that's convenience. It's community responsibility, Holt interjected. It's adults deciding a 12-year-old boy should be separated from his 4-year-old sister because nobody wanted the burden of taking both. Morrison turned to the judge. Second, regarding stability. The Becketts have provided these children with food shelter, clothing, medical care, and education for over 2 months. The children are healthy, growing, and thriving. Judge Kask of this territorial circuit interviewed both children privately and approved the adoption. He found no evidence of coercion, neglect, or improper treatment.
Judge Kask's
Preliminary approval is exactly that, preliminary, Holt said, subject to review. Judge Kask is present today, Your Honor, Morrison said, and willing to testify as a witness. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. Judge Kask is here. From the back of the room, Kask stood. Small, thin-faced, those sharp gray eyes taking in the entire courtroom. I am, Your Honor, if you'll permit me. Whitmore studied his colleague for a long moment. This is unusual. The situation is unusual. I believe my observations are relevant. I'll hear you. Take the witness chair. Kask moved to the front and sat with the composed authority of a man accustomed to being on the other side of the bench. Judge Kask, Morrison said, you interviewed both children privately. What did you find? I found 2 children who have experienced significant trauma, parental death, homelessness, starvation, and who are demonstrating remarkable recovery under the Beckett's care.
Did you find any evidence that they were being held against their will? None. Both children expressed strong, unprompted desire to remain with the Becketts. The boy Jonas was particularly articulate. He told me that the Becketts were the only adults who ever asked what he wanted. Holt stood. Your Honor, Judge Kask's emotional involvement in this case is precisely why a fresh review was necessary. I'm not emotionally involved, Kask said coolly. I'm professionally thorough. There's a difference. Did you investigate the Beckett's marriage? Holt pressed. Hours of meeting. Doesn't that concern you? It concerned me initially, so I asked about it. Mrs. Beckett told me she married Mr. Beckett because he was the first person in her life who offered her respect without expecting anything in return. Mr. Beckett told me he married her because he recognized what it meant to be unwanted, and he couldn't walk away from that. Kask paused.
In 23 years on the bench, I've seen marriages built on far less survive far more. The room was silent. Whitmore made a note. Mr. Holt, the judge said, do you wish to call your client? I do. Edgar Pruitt took the witness chair. Up close, he was smaller than he'd looked from across the room, with a thin mustache and fingers that wouldn't stop moving. Mr. Pruitt, Holt began, tell us about your relationship with the children's family. Their folks homesteaded near us, knew 'em for years. When the fever took 'em, it fell to us neighbors to look after things. I organized the arrangements, found good families willing to take each child. And the children ran before those arrangements were completed. They did. Boys got a stubborn streak. Wouldn't listen to reason. Morrison stood. Mr. Pruitt, you mentioned finding families for each child. Separate families, correct? Well, sure. Nobody could take both. That's a lot to ask of any family.
The Becketts took both. The Becketts are strangers who'd been married 5 minutes. That ain't the same as established families with roots. Mr. Pruitt, are you aware that a reward was posted for information about the children's whereabouts? Pruitt shifted in his chair. We were worried about them. 2 kids alone in the wilderness. Offering a reward seems like the right thing to do. How much was the reward? $50. That's a significant sum. Who posted it? I did, from my own pocket. That's very generous, Morrison said mildly. $50 for the safe return of 2 children you plan to give away to separate families. Tell me, Mr. Pruitt, what happens to the children's parents' homestead now that the parents are deceased and the children are gone? The room went quiet. Pruitt's restless fingers stilled. I don't know what you're implying. I'm asking a simple question. The homestead, 120 acres if I'm not mistaken, with the parents dead and the children removed, who assumes control of that land? Pruitt looked at Holt. Holt's expression was carefully blank. The community would manage it, Pruitt said, in trust. In trust for whom children who've been placed with separate families miles apart, children who would have no practical ability to claim their inheritance. Objection, Holt said quickly. This is speculation. It's a direct question about motive, Morrison countered. Your Honor, I believe Mr. Pruitt's interest in these children has less to do with their welfare and everything to do with 120 acres of uncontested land. The murmur that ran through the room was audible. Draper leaned forward in his seat. Henry Osborne shook his head slowly. Mr. Pruitt, Whitmore said, his voice dangerously even. Answer the question. Who stands to benefit from the children's land if they are separated and placed with distant families? Pruitt's face had gone the color of old milk. That land's got nothing to do with this. Then you won't mind telling us who's been working it since the parents died. Silence. Long, damning silence. I've been maintaining it, Pruitt said finally. Someone had to. Maintaining it, or farming it for profit. Objection. Holt was on his feet. Overruled, Whitmore said. Answer, Mr. Pruitt. I planted a crop. To preserve the value. For the children. For children you plan to place 40 miles apart, with no means of ever claiming their inheritance. Morrison turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to call Jonas Beckett to speak. The boy, he's 12. He's 12, and he's the rightful heir to his parents' land. I believe he has relevant testimony. Whitmore looked at Jonas. Young man, do you wish to speak? Jonas stood. His hands were shaking, but his voice was clear.
Yes, sir, I do. Come forward. Jonas walked to the front of the room.
He was thin young, still carrying the marks of his ordeal. But he stood straight, and when he spoke, his voice carried. My PA built that homestead from nothing. Him and my ma worked it for 8 years. Every fence post, every cleared acre, every seed in the ground that was theirs. When they died, Mr. Pruitt came to our cabin before the dirt was settled on the graves. Jonas, Pruitt started. Let him speak, Whitmore said sharply. He told me the land would be managed. Told me Bertie and I would be taken care of. Then he said Bertie was going to the Mercers 40 miles away. Said I'd go to the Grangers to work their farm. Jonas's voice hardened. He didn't ask us. Didn't ask me what I wanted or what my PA would have wanted. Just told me how it was going to be. And you ran, Whitmore said. I took my sister and I left. Because my pa's last words were, take care of your sister, Jonas. Not, let strangers split you up. Not, let Edgar Pruitt take your land. Take care of your sister. And the Becketts. Jonas turned and looked at Silas and Ruth. They found us by their creek, starving, half dead. Bertie was so weak she couldn't walk. And they didn't ask questions first. They didn't call the law or check for paperwork. Ruth picked up my sister and carried her inside and fed her. Silas looked at me and said, "You're safe here." His voice cracked. He steadied it. Nobody else said that. Not once. Not the neighbors, not Pruitt, not anybody, just them. And they meant it. He turned back to the judge. I'm 12 years old, sir. I can't vote, and I can't own property. And most people don't think my opinion matters. But I know what a family feels like. I had one before, and I have one now. The Becketts are my family, and Bertie's family. And if you take us away from them, you're not protecting us. You're destroying the only good thing that's happened to us since our parents died." The room was absolutely silent. Whitmore stared at Jonas for a long moment. Then he turned to Bertie, who was sitting in Ruth's lap, watching everything with enormous, frightened eyes. "Little one," Whitmore said, softening his voice, "do you know what's happening here?" Bertie looked at Ruth. Ruth nodded gently. "The man wants to take us away," Bertie said. "The one with the pointy face." Despite everything, several people in the room bit back smiles. Pruitt's face reddened. "And do you want to go with him?" Whitmore asked. No, I want to stay with Mama and Papa and Jonas." "Can you tell me why?" Bertie considered this, with the gravity of a 4-year-old facing the most important question of her life. "Because Mama sings to me when I'm scared, and Papa made a horse for Daisy." She held up the cloth doll. "And Jonas doesn't cry at night anymore because Pa told him he doesn't have to carry everything by himself." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. "And before," Bertie continued, her small voice filling the silent room, "when we were walking, and I was hungry and Jonas was crying, and it was dark, and I was so scared I prayed to Mama. My real Mama. I said, 'Mama, please send someone.' And then we found the creek, and Ruth was there." She looked at Ruth with absolute certainty. "Mama sent her." The sound Ruth made was not a sob. It was something deeper. Something that came from a place beyond grief or joy, from the place where love breaks you open and puts you back together differently than you were before. Whitmore removed his spectacles, cleaned them, put them back on. His composure was intact, but his hands weren't quite steady. "Mr. Holt," he said, "do you have further arguments?" Holt stood slowly. He looked at Pruitt, looked at the room full of witnesses, looked at a 4-year-old girl holding a cloth doll and telling a judge that her dead mother had sent her a new one. "No, Your Honor, we do not. Mr. Pruitt, I'm going to be direct with you." Whitmore's voice had turned to cold iron. "I believe your interest in these children is primarily financial. I believe you've been farming their parents' land for your own profit. And I believe your challenge to this adoption was motivated not by concern for the children's welfare, but by the threat that their legal placement with the Becketts would give them and their adoptive parents standing to reclaim that land. I'm not finished. I'm upholding Judge Cask's ruling in full. The adoption of Jonas and Bertie by Silas and Ruth Beckett is granted permanently and irrevocably. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the management of the children's inherited property. Any profits derived from that land during the children's absence are to be held in trust for Jonas and Bertie until they reach legal age." Pruitt's face collapsed. Holt was already packing his papers. "Mr. and Mrs. Beckett," Whitmore said. "Stand, please." They stood. Ruth was shaking. Silas was rigid as iron, holding himself together through force of will. "I've been on the bench a long time," Whitmore said. "I've seen families built on money, on obligation, on convenience, on tradition. Most of them function adequately. Some of them even thrive." He paused. "But I've rarely seen a family built the way yours was, from nothing by choice, through hardship, that shines the way yours does. Take your children home, Mr. Beckett. They're yours." The room erupted. Martha Whitfield was crying. Henry Osborne was clapping. Thomas Draper had his arm around his wife, both of them beaming. Reverend Whitfield was saying a prayer of thanksgiving that nobody had asked for, but everybody needed. Jonas reached Ruth first. He threw his arms around her with a force that nearly knocked her backward. "Mama," he said. First time. The word he'd been holding back, saving, protecting against the possibility that it might be taken away. "Mama." Ruth held him so tightly her arms ached. "I'm here. I'm right here." Bertie launched herself at Silas's legs. He picked her up and held her against his chest, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "See, Papa, I told you Daisy's horse would bring good luck." "You were right, Bird. You were absolutely right." Judge Cask appeared beside them. He extended his hand to Silas, and Silas took it. "You fought well," Cask said, had something worth fighting for. That you did. Cask looked at the family, Ruth holding Jonas Silas. Holding Bertie, all four of them connected, unbreakable. That you did.
They signed the final papers. Morrison witnessed. Whitmore stamped his seal. It was done. Permanent, legal, irrevocable. Jonas Beckett, Bertie Beckett, children of Silas and Ruth Beckett, forever. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon was warm, and the street was busy with people who had no idea what had just happened inside that room.
Silas stood on the boardwalk with his family around him and felt the world settle into place. Ruth slipped her hand into his. Silas, yeah, take us home. He looked at her, at this woman who'd been standing alone on chapel steps with nothing, who'd gotten on a stranger's wagon and turned a rough cabin into a home, who'd loved 2 orphan children so fiercely that a judge in a territorial courtroom had seen it shining from across the room. Ruth. Yes. This thing between us. It ain't business anymore. Hasn't been for a long time. I know. I love you. Should have said it before now, but I didn't have the words. Still don't really. But I love you, and I love those kids. And everything I've got, every acre, every nail, every breath left in me, it's yours. All of it. Ruth's eyes filled. Silas Beckett, 7 years you didn't talk to a living soul. Now you go and say something like that. Reckon you're worth breaking a long silence for. She kissed him. Right there on the boardwalk in front of Henry Osborne's store, and Reverend Whitfield's chapel, and God and everybody. Kissed him like a woman who'd been waiting her whole life for a man worth kissing, and had finally found him in the last place she'd expected. Jonas groaned. Do they have to do that in public? Bertie clapped her hands. Kiss again, kiss again. Let's go home, Silas said. They climbed into the wagon. Jonas up front with his father, 3 new books on his lap, his shoulders straight, his eyes clear. Ruth to Bertie in the back, the little girl chattering to Daisy about everything that had happened, explaining the courtroom in terms only a 4-year-old could invent. The wagon rolled north, toward the homestead, toward the life they'd built from nothing but stubborn love and desperate hope. Silas drove. Ruth hummed. Jonas read. Bertie sang. And somewhere behind them, a chapel stood on a dusty street in a small Montana town. The chapel where Ruth Calloway had stood alone with nothing. The chapel where Silas Beckett had turned his wagon around. The place where 2 people who'd been thrown away by the world had found each other and refused to let go. The homestead appeared in the valley as the sun was dropping low. The cabin with its sod roof and stone chimney. The barn, the garden, the creek running silver through the meadow. Bertie saw it first. Home, she shouted. Home, home, home. Jonas closed his book and smiled. A real smile. Young and unguarded, and full of something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Ruth touched the adoption papers in her pocket. Legal, permanent, sealed by a judge, and witnessed by a community that had showed up for them when it mattered most. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. He sat there for a moment, looking at everything he'd built. The walls he'd raised alone. The fences he'd mended in silence. The land he'd worked for 7 years without anyone to share it with. All of it meant something different now. All of it meant more. Pa? Jonas said. You all right? Silas looked at his son, at his daughter, at his wife. Better than all right, he said. I'm home. Ruth climbed down and lifted Bertie from the wagon. Jonas jumped down with the easy grace of a boy who was finally learning to move without fear. Silas tied the horse and stood in the yard, watching his family walk toward the cabin. Ruth paused at the door and looked back at him. That same face he'd seen on the chapel steps, angular, composed steady. But the eyes were different now, full of something that had been empty before, full of light. Coming? She asked. Right behind you. She smiled. Always. Silas Beckett walked into his cabin. The fire was cold. The air was still, and 4 people's worth of living was scattered across every surface. Jonas's books, Bertie's toys, Ruth's herbs, his own carvings on the windowsill. It was small. It was rough. It was everything. He'd claimed a bride nobody wanted, and found a woman who made him whole. He'd taken in children nobody would keep together, and they'd made him a father. He'd opened a door he'd sealed for 7 years, and what walked through it saved his life. Ruth lit the fire. Jonas fetched water. Bertie set Daisy on the table and told her they were home for good. And Silas stood in the center of the cabin he'd built with his own hands and realized the truth that had been waiting for him since the day he turned that wagon around. He hadn't saved Ruth Calloway. She'd saved him. They'd saved each other. And then they'd saved 2 children. And those children had saved them right back, and the saving just kept going, expanding outward like ripples in water, touching everyone it reached. That was what family was. Not blood, not papers. Not a judge's seal, though all those things mattered. Family was choosing to stop when you could keep writing, choosing to turn around when the road ahead was easier, and choosing to open your door when closing it was safer. Family was Ruth's hand in his. Jonas calling him Pa. Bertie's arms around his neck. Family was the thing you built when everything else had been taken away, and it was stronger than any of the things you'd lost because you chose it. Every day. Again and again. With everything you had. The fire caught. The cabin warmed. The creek sang outside. And 4 people who had all known what it meant to be unwanted, to be left behind, to stand alone with nothing. They sat down together at a rough wooden table in a small cabin in Montana Territory, and they ate supper, and they were home. Not because the world had finally been kind to them, because they had been brave enough to be kind to each other